In the last 2 weeks, in the videos, I've been looking at the technical levels of support and resistance for the S&P 500. Today I'd like to do something different. I'd like to focus on the relative performance of a sector of the market compared to the S&P 500 in order to try and gauge how investors are perceiving the economic development as businesses reopen and if it's being positive or negative. Now, the sector I'm going to be taking a look at is the small cap sector. The small cap sector, relative to the S&P 500, has many different variables that can affect its relative performance. But the two that are really interplaying right now that give some indication of how investors are perceiving what's taking place in the economy and the stock market are that the fact that the small cap sector raises most of its money domestically compared to the S&P 500, which generates its revenue on an international basis. Now, also as well, the smaller companies have much greater difficulty accessing capital compared to the larger companies in the S&P 500. So if the expectations are for a growing economy, that favors small caps in the sense that they'll be able to access capital easier, at least than expected. So let's take a look. I'm going to be using the ETF in the States, IWM, which is the small cap sector for the Russell 2000. And you can see here that the sector did correct sharply in February and in March, and it did bounce just like the S&P 500. But I'm more concerned with the relative importance line. And you can see here, as this line is moving down, it means the small cap sector is underperforming the S&P 500, and that's exactly what took place in 2019 here. And you can see here that it did drop sharply in February into late March. And so this is showing that we're seeing substantial underperformance for the small cap sector relative to the S&P 500. Since that time, though, what we've seen is this up and down where this motion where the small cap sector would outperform and then underperform, outperform and underperform. And more recently, we've seen an uptick through the top of this consolidation box, or the relative consolidation box, which is positive. So this is saying that there's a lot of narrative of course, in the marketplace right now about reopening of companies. And so we're starting to see this being reflected in that outperformance for the small cap sector. But if we start to see this small cap sector start to underperform and break below this bottom of the box, that would be an indication that investors are perceiving that maybe it's a little bit more difficult out there than what they had previously perceived.